Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Will Your Current ERP Make or Break You in Uncertain Times? My name is John Stampin. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for WMEP Manufacturing Solutions. And this morning's session is presented by SSR, Superior Resources, Inc. SSR is WMEP's strategic partner for technology solutions, and we're very pleased that they could share their expertise with us this morning on this topic. I'm just going to go through a few logistics and then turn it over to Sarit and Raj from SSR to introduce themselves and get on with the presentation. So all phones are muted during the presentation. Webcams will not be utilized either. Questions can be posted using the webinar chat function. So if you move your mouse to the top of your screen, you'll see 3 buttons. And actually, on the second button from the left, it's actually 5 buttons, is the chat function. If you click on that, then you can ask your questions there. Questions will be monitored throughout the presentation, and Raj and Sarit have indicated they really like questions, so feel free to ask them as they occur to you. And then we'll also answer questions after the presentation as time permits. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to those who registered. And then also, if you'd like a PDF copy of this presentation, email info@wmep.org to request that. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Sarit and Raj from SSR.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And this is Sarit Singhal. With me, I have...
This is Raj Muthupandiyan.
And today we'll be talking about your current ERP, as well as how you realign it and or select a new ERP to make sure that it helps you address things during uncertain times. So a real quick introduction of who SSR is. We're a technology company located in Brookfield, Wisconsin. We have 2 offices, one in Brookfield, one in Chennai, India. Roughly about 200 clients, and we provide something that we call total IT that includes everything from a help desk, managed services, engineering, software development, staffing and sourcing, and virtual CIO. System alignment and system selection is part of our virtual CIO practice. Quick background on myself. I started the company almost right out of college. I'm an electrical engineer by education with a minor in computer science. I've been in information systems for about 25 years and have participated in 30-plus ERP selections, as well as implementation projects. These guys did ask me to add a few things about myself. I'm married with a wife named Lisa and 2 kids, and one of my favorite hobbies is sailing. Raj.
I'm Raj Muthupandiyan. I lead the Advanced Solutions team here, and more than 20 years experience. And my majority of the experience in the large corporations, more interaction with the small, medium-sized companies. And my personal background is I love to run, and I live in Brookfield too. Thank you.
So our agenda today, we really broke it into 5 basic parts, just kind of talking through why do people have to realign their ERPs, the pitfalls and the pandemic and how they're affected. Second part, we're going to walk you through, if you know that you're thinking about realigning it, what's the approach, how you document your current solution, map out your future state, do a needs and wants analysis, and then decide to optimize or consider a replacement. One quick note I want to share with you guys before we go too far into it. SSR does not sell any ERPs, so we're providing it to you more from a background of how you select ERPs versus presenting something that is part of our product set. So I want to start off by sharing with you why do a lot of people eventually have this conversation with me. One of the things I've learned over time is, and this is true for almost every industry, manufacturing as well as any other one, ERPs and ERP alignment is a pretty big undertaking. So what a lot of companies do is they'll start off with putting a team together, looking at their processes, selecting an ERP, implementing an ERP, and that process starts, I'll call it day zero. At that point, you've got it aligned to where your business is for the most part. The next step that happens afterwards is eventually your business starts to change. You might have added potentially a new product offering. You might have actually looked at it and said, you know what, I'm going to go from a product company to an engineer-to-order company. And pretty soon your current ERP, the way it's configured and aligned for yourself, no longer is meeting those needs. Maybe at one point when you were smaller, you didn't need to worry about detailed job costs and standard costing was fine, or inventory management wasn't as big a deal. But as your organization grew and changed, you kept adding different things, but what I found in most cases is people don't look at their ERP and say, how does this help feed my business and keep it going as I move forward? Another example might be I've seen companies buy a company, divest from a company. They're trying to integrate their current ERP with another entity that's out there. These are all things that will eventually lead to, I've got an ERP, it's no longer working for me. Partly, if you think about it, it's because your organization has grown, it's changed, but the ERP that was set up 5 years, 7 years ago still continues to do what it does. One side note that I've also seen is a lot of people will look at it and say, no, I've been upgrading the software, so I went from version 2 to version 3, but it's not about just the version of it. It's actually understanding how your business operates and looking at the software itself and saying, does it continue to fit my needs and and the outcomes I'm looking for? So that's usually a big driver on why this happens. So the things I would tell you is here's the 8 major things that are additional conversations that drive this discussion. One would be company growth and people. So again, your organization might have grown, it might have even shrank, and you've had people changes. Many times what was done in the initial implementation of the ERP, those individuals are no longer there, and you're trying to figure out why it was done a certain way, why do we capture something a certain way. The other reasons I'll notice is, again, today we're going to sometimes industry 3.0, industry 4.0, and we're looking for advanced technologies. We might be looking for RFID. We might be looking at automated shop floors. We want a smart shop floor with our machines talking on manufacturing data, and a current ERP may or may not provide that. One big thing, especially that plagues a number of small to mid-sized companies, is at some point you have too many independent systems. I can't tell you how many clients have sat down, and when we start looking at mapping out where they're at, not only do they have an ERP, they have a completely independent CRM. They're using Excel for some type of pricing or configurator tool. They've got some little access databases that might be part of their RMA processes, all kinds of different things that they've built up. And so what's happening is a lot of people are re-entering that same data over and over and over again. Mergers and acquisitions is another area. Again, there's some efficiency on it. Once you acquire someone or bring something together, you're looking at it saying, how do I actually figure out, do I want to share inventory? I want to understand performance on it. How do I get scale? Part of it is really trying to see which ERP is the ideal one, or do you need to select a new ERP for the combined entities? Two things that are often a limiter I've noticed in ERPs is multi-location, multi-currencies. As your organization grows, not all ERPs can support that, and so those will be ones that will be drivers on this. And then finally, the last two would be is complexity. Again, if you were a product company and you went to an engineer-to-order company, you're now doing project management, you're doing sample management, number of other things on top of actually just managing your product list. And so those complexities might drive this type of realignment. The final thing that we always get is we need better access to data, and we need access to data from a timely standpoint, and our current ERP is not providing that. So those are usually the big 8 that people are looking at it and saying, I'm questioning my ERP, and is it the right thing for me, or should I be looking at something else? So where you're at is the way we've approached it is you want to go to it and look and say, where am I right now? So what's my current state? Determine where you're at, make a decision from all the data, and then figure out if you should optimize or replace. And the approach that we've recommended is kind of the following. First thing I would tell you is about 75% of the time, I notice that ERP selections and alignment are oftentimes led by a CFO. And I actually feel sorry for my friends that are CFOs in this. Part of the reality of an ERP is ERP is supposed to be an enterprise tool to run your entire organization. And a lot of people don't gather and put a team together. My big thing is you need to have your fantasy draft, and you need to put your A team together. This should include some leadership in it. ERPs require a significant amount of change management. Leadership needs to be involved in it. Leadership needs to help decide what are priorities and also help manage the change that will occur in it. There's a huge sales component to it. There's customer service, who's oftentimes entering quotes, dealing with RMAs. There's production and operation side of it, the accounting, sometimes even the legal. And one of the other things I would tell you is getting a third party. In many cases, we worked with WMEP, and they've participated in these type of discussions and saying, what could an ERP today do, and what could an ERP in the future do for you? I would tell you that having someone as a third party just gives you some outside viewpoints on, is your process the right process? Is the data that you're going to measure, it gives you kind of a sounding board. The things I would recommend, some pitfalls in that third party would be is, don't select someone from your current ERP. Again, maybe at the end, if you decide you want to realign it, it'll be important to have someone from the current ERP, but initially you really want to have an unbiased view on it. I'm not a big believer on having someone that's part of your third party that sells an ERP of their own or is potentially an ERP vendor from that standpoint. I just think there's a conflict there from that perspective. So the next set of processes, now you've put your team together, and how do you get started? So what you want to do is start with your present state. A lot of people look at it and say, hey, I want to think about what's broken, what I need to fix. I want to start talking about my future state. What I've learned over the last 20 years is it's much easier for people to document where they're at today. So you start off with your three basic legs in a business. Right, so you start off with your marketing and sales team, your operations and delivery team, and finance and controls team together. So if you think about what you're looking at in marketing and sales, I'm looking at the process of how do you determine what type of lead generation you do, how do you end up eventually determining an opportunity, how do you go about writing a proposal, how do you price it. I've seen everything from people that have Excel configurators that need to be passed around to 3 or 4 people, depending on the size of the project, to people using full-blown configuration applications that are web-enabled with a 3D representation of the end product that the customer will get. The next step on it would be is the operations and delivery side of it. So once you've actually won a project, what happens next? You're starting to look at what does scheduling look like? What is inventory management side of it? How do you do production? How do you manage your resources? How do you purchase items? All of those things, all the way down to QA/QC, picking it and shipping it to your customer. And then finally, from there, you would go into how do I bill my customer? How do I collect from it? Now, a couple of things I want to add on how do you document your current process. One is the ideal way to document it is to use a basic workflow template, and there's a number of tools out there. That's a question that was actually asked already, which things like Visio is a great tool from that standpoint. If you're looking at something online that you want to collaborate with, I've used Lucidchart from that perspective. But what you're really trying to do is figure out the 80-20 rule. What are the things that happen 80% of the time that you're trying to map out to say, if I'm putting a quote together, I have a really simple quote, a mid-sized quote, a large quote, what's the process that we go through? If I need to do an engineer-to-order process and I need to have a validation, we want to actually accept this project, how do I manage that side of it? So you're really creating these simple workflow diagrams so that you can represent how you do it today. In each of these, once you're done from that standpoint, you're looking at it once it's completed, you kind of put all of them on the wall and you start looking at saying, are there things that I'm doing manually? This is where you'll find a lot of things where maybe you're using Salesforce for your CRM, but you're not using Salesforce for doing your quotes on it. So now you're actually taking all the data from Salesforce, entering it into some other application or into that spreadsheet, which is saved on your network. And then once you win the opportunity, you're re-entering them into your ERP or manufacturing system. So that's really what I'm talking about when you're looking at, are there manual activities or workaround? Workarounds I've seen is RMA is a very common one that I see. Scheduling is another big common one that I see. People will do where they'll take the data, they'll put it together, and they'll actually put it into another system to try and manage it. The second part of it, you're looking at it saying, once I have mapped everything out, are these activities, do they actually fit my business from that standpoint? Or are you trying to make the ERP, are you trying to make your business fit the ERP, or is really the ERP supporting your business? That's actually a common problem where you're looking at it saying, well, this is how the system does it, but you really need to look at it and say, what are you trying to accomplish, and then how does the ERP support that? One major reason why we all started doing ERPs was to manage tribal knowledge, right? As our organizations grow, many of you guys that are in this call, if you just think and reflect back on it, is there a decision process from the time you start quoting something till the time you ship something out the door and bill it, that there's a decision or knowledge that sits in one person's head? You know, it could be, who do I call if I need something done to a product that I'm making? I've got a special heat treater, or is there somebody else from that perspective, or some knowledge that here's how we build a quote, or here's how we schedule something that sits in someone's head and it's not documented? That's actually a lot of risk from a business standpoint. If you guys think about it specifically from a pandemic standpoint, we have a lot of resource constraint. It's really important that we look at this and say to manage business risk is also to manage our resource risk. So we really have to look at it and say, what do we put in place in our ERPs so that in the event that you have someone that's out, even for a short time or extended time, you can keep the business going from that perspective. I think that kind of leads to the last part where we talk about, can I measure productivity and my critical KPIs? So if you think about what we've talked about, we've really mapped out our current state. Part of what you're doing in your pandemic process is you're looking at it and saying, what are the things I need to measure? I'm going to talk, actually, I think Raj and I are going to talk a little bit about some of those potential data points, but your ERP should be supporting that. I can't tell you how often I hear, yeah, I'm using an ERP, but I have an accountant or somebody else that's putting a bunch of reports together so I can keep understanding where the business is. Well, reports historically are looking kind of from a rear view mirror standpoint, right? You're waiting for the event to occur. Oftentimes you're looking at data a week, 2 weeks later, sometimes a month later. It doesn't let you respond and react as quickly as you need to. Also, the data set that you're going to be looking at is now constantly changing, right? It's no longer about what's my pipeline look like, what's my revenue and profitability look like. You really need to be able to dissect your business and be able to say, what does my utilization is going to look like? And we'll talk about some of those in a short amount of time. What are the things that I need to know so I can make intelligent decisions about my business? So the next step I would tell you is once you've actually looked at your present state, you've done that really quick analysis to say, what are the things that are in sync and out of sync with my current solution? You now need to start thinking about what the future looks like. This is actually usually one of my most enjoyable time in these processes because it's oftentimes a light bulb moment. Once people see all of their processes documented in a simple workflow format, all of a sudden the light bulbs turn on to say, wow, we've really created a very complex process and system that's harder to maintain, manage, and scale. So what you're really looking at is a couple different things, right? You're looking at the whole concept of here's all my processes, what am I doing for customer retention? So especially right now, everyone knows in normally good times, it takes 10 times the effort to add a new customer than it does to take and maintain and grow from within an existing customer. How much knowledge do you have? How are you understanding what you're delivering to your customer? If you've provided them a commit date, how quickly are you hitting those commit dates? What's your quality that you're delivering from that standpoint? Those are all things that you should be looking at. From an operations and delivery standpoint, I think a big item that you're looking at is troubleshooting and rework. What are roadblocks that are occurring in my production delivery process? Where am I wasting time, machine, equipment, material that is being redone from that standpoint, and how much visibility do I have to that becomes really, really important. Big thing that for those of you guys that have been reading it, and I'm sure everyone's thought about this, it's expected that, as PPP and other things dry up, we may see an impact on collections. So how much are you looking at your receivables? How well do you understand your customers' payment receivables and trending, and is it increasing, and what are the things that you're doing to address for that? Your ERP, if it's implemented correctly, and if you've got the KPIs that needs to run on top of it, should be able to provide, what's the status of my commitment to my customer? How did I actually deliver what we promised them? How do I validate there's more opportunities from them? From troubleshooting, reworking items, to collecting things. One quick example of something I'll share with you that oftentimes is discussion from a sales standpoint is, imagine if you guys have only one salesperson and you have 3 different customers. If you knew from your ERP how many times each of those customers have reached out to you to get a quote, and what's your close ratio and profitability by customer, if you only had one salesperson and you could give them that data to say, customer A, my close ratio is only about 5%, where customer 2 or B, I'm usually at 10 to 15%, and customer 3 doesn't actually buy anything from me, you now have visibility to say, well, customer 3 is probably looking at just shopping us around. Where do I spend my time and energy? Those are the kind of discussions and things you guys should be looking at as you realign or decide to select an ERP during these very uncertain times.
Okay, thank you, sir. In June, we had another webinar from SSR, and that goes more into data and KPI and our process. So I highly recommend you watch the recording, and we will share that information at the end of this webinar, or as a follow-up, we'll send an email. Looking at the current pandemic, organizations that had good understanding of which activities produce the most revenue and profit were at greater advantage. They could see which revenue streams were still viable and which would produce the best results with the least effort. Particularly, that's very important in the pandemic, what we are facing now. I'm going to share a couple of examples that, in my interaction with our customers in the last year. There's a customer in Madison. They focus on manufacturing. Both the examples I'm going to share with you are both our manufacturing customers. The Madison customer, it's basically, going back to the earlier point I made, they worked with us on creating and bringing their sales process together, bringing the data together in one place and aligning the data in a way that it streamlines their sales activities. So the data visualization and dashboards we created, I talked to the sales manager there. One of the points that he made so far was it changed the way the cultural change it started making in their sales organization. The sales team became more self-driven, and they proactively look at the dashboard and start planning their weekly activities. That's very important because when there is a pandemic, there is no micromanagement and there is no time for managing your resources, and the sales members are self-driven with the data that we created, with the dashboards we created. And there's a second example in Milwaukee, another manufacturing customer, a similar scenario. Actually, I talked to him a couple of weeks ago, the sales manager. On top of the cultural change that's making in the sales team, it's not just the past data he's focused on. Now he wants to do the next set of data. So basically, not that working on the reactive aspect of the data, he wants to move more towards the proactive and how these tools and data can drive my sales team more powerful in making right decisions and being proactive when it comes to running the business and executing the business plan. And so that's more of a sales aspect. In the same organization, they saw the delta in other areas of the business when the pandemic hit for the past 4 months. And the top leadership, they decided to pursue the same things we did for the sales organization and implement the same thing for their operation in the factory. They wanted to put dashboards in their TVs and stuff, and they want to create the right behaviors and change the culture, not just on the sales end, not just on the upstream. They wanted to do the same thing from the downstream too, so that it's a combined effort to face the pandemic. It's probably going to be another 6 months. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. So some of the things that we're looking at is when you're mapping out your future solutions, here's a sample set of things that you may want to look at. Again, one of the things that I'll oftentimes see is we've sent a lot of quotes out, but who's the one that's following up? Where is inside sales looking at it to say what's quote aging looking like? Your win ratios might be potentially an area that you're looking at. I think I gave that example where you're looking at different customers and you want to know what your win ratio by customer is, by rep is, by product is. All of those types of things will help you make better, intelligent decisions quickly to say, what do I really want to focus on? What's your return customer ratio is a really important thing. Again, if you think about it, it's always easier to keep working with that existing customer, show value to them, that they keep coming back from that perspective. Do you understand it? Do you identify it? Do you have it on the wall that says, here's my top 25, 50 customers that I work with? Those operational and delivery details, I think that, again, in trying to keep this presentation broad, these are some samples. There would be ones that would be specific to each of the industries that you guys are in, but you would look at things like inventory turn. We all know inventory is cash sitting out in our shelves. What's our turn look like? How do I address it? How do I remove it? How do I reduce that impact to my cash? Any kind of lead times. One of the things with the pandemic that happened to a number of our clients, we're in a global economy, and so they were looking at it saying, well, when we source our solution, a lot of that is being impacted by our partners in Asia, by our partners in Europe, and those lead times were not really put together well in their ERPs. So to think about it, to say, you order it, you normally look at it, it's 3 weeks on the water. Pretty soon it became 6 weeks, it became 12 weeks in the water. So understanding your bill of material lead times became really important. And there's a lot of simple things you can do. You can start looking at your suppliers. In the past, it used to be EDI, but there's tools that you can use to look into your business partners and say, what's the status of my order, where is it, and how quickly will I get it? Setup time, how much time is being set up to do these jobs? You should be looking for efficiencies that you're driving in your shop floors and your manufacturing and distribution, that you reduce those setup times so that your teams can work more efficiently. The other part that's actually fascinating is during this time period, we've seen our customers talk about vendors that are slowly starting to creep up their costs. I think part of it is an impact of cash management. It's also, they're adding more regulatory things that they need to. There's also supply and demand component of it. But for you to have visibility to say what's happening with my vendors, what's happening with my individual items, is my prices going up? I think that's important at this point. Another part that we looked at was first pass yield. So if you are in doing manufacturing, we're looking at quality. That's a great way to say how often during our first pass, what's our yield level and what's our quality from that standpoint. You don't necessarily have to measure every quality component if you can get your head around that. Utilization is a really important thing. I think, again, when I look at operations and delivery, I'm looking at machine, people, and resources. How well do you understand all three of those from a utilization? It's an area where I've seen people start thinking about it, saying, you know what, I've got a machine that's sitting there. The cost of having a person come to that machine, especially during this time, is much higher than for me to outsource that part of it to a third party during this time period. So there's all kinds of things that if you understand that data set, it'll help you kind of manage what you need to do with your ERP as you kind of move forward. From a controls and from a finance and legal standpoint, you really want to look at your AR aging. I think we talked about that. Your cost of goods, and then margin by product. And again, depending on the size of your organization, you're going to have really detailed cost of goods and job costings, or you might be using a standard or an average job costing. But as long as you understand it, it'll at least give you a chance to understand which products are moving and what's your cost to deliver those products. So again, if you think about what we've talked about, our first step was let's map out our current process, kind of look at it and say, where do I have workaround and other things? Then you're going through it and saying, well, gee, these are things that are inefficient. I need to think about a future state. And you're looking at what's the data that I want to capture during that future state, which then leads to figuring out your ultimate goal. What are you trying to figure out? Is your current ERP going to help you get there? Is it going to support you during these times? Or is it time for you to consider looking at something new? So part of the next step before you can actually decide either of those completely, you kind of need to conduct a needs and wants analysis. So you did your future state map. Now you would actually bring your team back together and write up a detailed list of all of those requirements. So I gave a couple samples in here. So let's say in marketing, we were looking at it saying, I want quote tracking. And you really want to describe what does that look like. The other part that you're going to do in that process is you're going to prioritize it and score it. The scoring system I've used in the past is a score of 1 to 3. 3 being it's really critical, it's important to my business, and 1 being it's more of a want. If I have it, it's great. It's not the end of the world if I don't have it. This is a great way to get everyone in your organization aligned. It's also a great way to, if you decide to stay with your current ERP, your discussion with your ERP vendor or partner will be, these are the things we're trying to get to make sure are in place. If you decide to go to a new ERP, you also have a very clear message at that point to be able to tell a potential new vendor, these are the things your ERP has to be able to do for me. Again, the way I look at it is break your business into those 3 legs, sales and marketing, operations and delivery, and then finance and control. And then within each one of those, you want to break it into major categories. So example, in sales and marketing, I would start off with the marketing side of it. How do we get suspects and prospects? Then I would start looking at it saying, once I've established my process of getting suspects and prospects, within that, you know what, I get suspects through trade shows, I get them through buying a list. What do I do with those? How do I reach out to them? Things like drip marketing. These are all things you want to put in there. Kind of a major pitfall that I see a lot of people doing, especially if they decided they're going to go for a new ERP, the assumption that they have is, hey, anything new that I buy, it's going to be way better. It's going to have everything that my current system has, so I'm just going to focus on something new and those things that are actually missing. I think it's important to talk about what are the things that you currently have, because oftentimes that's really the barrier of ERPs not getting implemented correctly. Other simple data point that I want to share with you is what I've read is up to 70% of all ERPs that are implemented never reach the goal and objective that the company had. And they generally cost about twice what you had planned on spending. In the time that I've spent doing ERP selections, I think the big things are define what the future vision looks like, really create a detailed needs and wants analysis. Without having a real detailed needs and wants analysis, it's really hard to validate what are you trying to get done, how should it look like, and how do you check off if a vendor has provided everything that you're looking for, or a current solution's meeting all those needs from that standpoint. So if you now think about it, you've now done all these things. You've mapped out your future state. You put your needs and wants together, and now it's really that decision-making time. Are you using things that you should be asking is, are you using the most current version, or are you in a cloud platform? I'm seeing a lot more customers ask, should I consider going to the cloud? I'm a big believer that says, you really need to look at the right solution and then figure out the platform that it runs on. Don't just go on one particular platform because you think that cloud is going to be better. You really want to make sure it's aligned to your business needs. A big thing would be do you understand the full program's capability? If you decide to have a realignment or a selection, I've done 1 to 2 day demos where someone's looking at it and going through each of those single needs and wants and walking through how each of them would be addressed. A good way for your vendors to present their solution is actually to use your workflow to show how they would actually go through each of your steps, that their ERP makes logical sense. Are you going to bounce around, or is there a logical flow on how your organization will use it? Another big question is, can your solution provide real-time, accurate reporting on the KPIs? So you guys spent a lot of time up front talking about these are things I need my ERP to provide for me. If it doesn't do that, I need to figure out, maybe I'm going to need a third-party solution, things like a BI tool, a data warehouse, those type of things. But you want to really understand those things as you're coming to this decision-making. The last part is you have to make material adaptations to make your solution fit. That's a bunch of complex words to say, hey, at the end of the day, am I going to have to make big changes to either my organization or my processes to make this thing fit? And if you do, it's probably not a strongly aligned solution. And so if you're going back and saying, I know where I am, I know where I need to get to, I know what I want to measure, I also know all the things I'm trying to accomplish, these 4 questions become fairly easy for you to answer. And you'll actually find once you do that, the decision-making of if I'm going to optimize or replace actually becomes pretty clear. So now you're actually at the point of, hey, I'm going to decide that I'm going to optimize, and I'll kind of walk through the high-level steps. We've done presentations on how to select an ERP, and so I'll give you guys the 4 steps on it, on optimizing, and then other ones for selecting. But if you decide that you're going to optimize it, the first thing you're looking at is you've got these present state maps and future state maps. You need to really reconfigure it to match the updated process. So the methodology in that would be sitting down with your consultants, with your ERP partners, looking at it, saying, here's the future state that we're looking at. Help us figure out how we're going to get there. In most cases, I see our clients run these systems in parallel, unless it's a minor change that they're making. They go through those processes. They continue to run the business on the old platform as they kind of move into the new process side of it. A big part in there is once you've actually established that process, doing a number of test runs through it to make sure that things are running the way they should. This is a great opportunity at this point to create your training material, your sample data set, so you can actually show your employees how you're going to use it. Once you've got those things put together, you're really now looking at migration and integration. So you've decided you're going to optimize it. This is your opportunity to take all those Excel documents, all those Access databases that have been built over time, little workarounds that you've put together, and say, do I now need to bring those in? So you're really creating a very detailed project plan to say, what are processes I'm really bringing into the ERP? What are third-party tools that I've built or workarounds that I've built? How am I going to put them back into my ERP? Where am I migrating data? Where am I integrating it? So an example of your integration, I'm working with 2 clients right now where they have an e-commerce platform. The e-commerce platform has their product, but anytime someone places an order, another human takes that order and re-enters that entire thing into the ERP. That's just not efficient, and that's prone to making errors. It slows out the time to market. It impacts what your customer experience is going to be. I've seen that in another client where depending on if their customer is ordering from online versus calling inside sales versus calling an outside salesperson, they end up with 3 different prices for the same tool. So a big belief that I have is order entry should always follow one common process. If you're using e-commerce, try and see if even your inside sales and your outside sales and customers are all using the exact same platform and methodology in ordering products from you. And that's really what I'm talking about from migration integration. Another example would be potentially you have a PDM of some type or tax software. You've integrated that in one place, but it's not integrated across the board. Those are the type of things you're trying to map out during this process to say, how do I bring that together? Once you've actually looked at, here's my new process, you've figured out the migration integration process, the next thing is now you're ready to really start realigning it. So it's really training it and reinforcing it. I'm assuming most of you guys have experienced this. You come up with a new approach, new idea. Unfortunately, you find about a third of your employees follow that new process really well. A third of them kind of make some mistakes, stumble along. They're not exactly sure why you're doing it. And a third will complain to you guys to say, well, this is silly. Why are we doing it? The old way worked better. So adoption is really important. And one of the things that I would tell you is keep bringing up those workflows. Put up the workflows that said this was really what our past used to look like, here's our future, and here's the benefit that everyone's going to get. Once you can kind of present that, you'll find slowly over time, it's almost like saying, why are you doing it? Answer the why, not just the how, and you'll find that your adoption improves dramatically. Give people a significant amount of time. You all know that different people learn differently. Some people learn by watching a video. Other people learn by watching or reading a book, and third people will learn by doing it. So understand your staff and help them figure out how to do this. One thing that does come up in the same area is some of our clients that don't have any type of digital process in their shop floor, their concern often is, well, now we're about to start putting in a kiosk or a time clock or something that my travelers are going to be managed on in the shop floor. And all of a sudden, my employees that have been here for 15, 20 years are going to think that Big Brother just showed up. Part of what you really want to do is spend time on that to say, we're really trying to figure out how to manage our organization better, how to schedule ourselves, how to manage resources better. It's not about Big Brother. It's about the data to help us run better and more efficiently. We're in a global world. We're competing in a global economy. And for us to be efficient, we need to be able to know these data points so we can make good decisions as we move forward. The last part is we all got into this place. If you guys remember my first story, we start off by making a big selection process. We then go in and implement it, and then we kind of forget about it. So it's really important to reassess and realign. So those 4 steps, if at a bare minimum, at least annually, take a look at your future state workflows, take a look at your processes, and revalidate if you are actually continuing to align it. Don't wait 3 to 5 years. I would tell you 3 to 5 years is usually the minimum. I often see 7 to 10 years before people go back and say, gee, I haven't really changed a lot in the way I was using my current ERP, and it's not working for me. Well, if you think about it, you've been using that same house for 10 years and you haven't made any maintenance or improvement. That's tough. At the same time, your family and everything else has changed. So it's no longer aligning is kind of the analogy I would give you. It's really important as your business changes that you're looking at this. This would be really the optimization approach. If you now decide that you don't want to optimize and the current platform can't support what you're looking for, the next approach would be is really looking at it saying, I think I need to replace my current ERP. First comment I want to share with you, because I get this a lot, is ERP selection to implementation is generally a 12 to 18-month journey for most small to mid-sized companies. In my earlier life, when I worked in large enterprises, it took us almost 2 years to implement phase 1 of a large global ERP. But the process kind of goes like this. If you think about it, you put together your future state, you put together all of your needs and wants. Now the next step would be is to kind of put together an RFP. So you're really going to look at it and say, who are different companies that can provide solutions that meet our needs? And that part, again, you can go to other companies like yourself. You can go to trade shows. You can work with people that are ERP vendor selection consultants. They'll help you identify potential solution providers that can provide it. Your goal should be initially your RFP goes out to 7 to 10 potential providers. And they should be able to provide you answers by, it's a match based on your workflow, it's a match based on your needs and wants, and they should be able to give you pricing. One of the things that I always do is ask for 5 years of total cost of ownership. What's the cost of buying the product initially? What's the cost of implementing it, configuring it? And then what should I budget each year to keep realigning it, plus all the support costs? That really gives you a lot of visibility into what an ERP is going to cost you in the long run. Once you've kind of gotten those answers, you need to normalize that. And what I mean by that is you're really looking at all of the vendors and you're looking at saying, how do they all compare? You remember when we talked about in the needs and wants, we rated things as a 3, a 2, and a 1. Anything that's a 3, you almost have to stop. If the vendor says, no, I can't do it, you really have to be able to stop and say, well, why not? Or is there another approach or solution to get this done with your platform? And if it doesn't, your team has to make a decision if that vendor should make that short list. The goal should be is once you've got these responses, your team should be able to narrow it down to about 2 to 3 potential vendors that make your short list. Those vendors, you usually want to bring them into your offices, have them do a deep presentation. Again, I think as I talked earlier, have them use your workflow and your needs and wants to kind of review everything. Your steering committee should be reviewing each of those requirements and writing down, yes, that they've seen it, and they agree that it'll meet those needs. Once you've actually selected the vendor, one of the things that you really want to do before you sign all the deals, kind of similar to optimization, what's the data history that you're bringing along with you? What does migration and integration look like? All of those things you should be defining with them before you sign the dotted line. Because the big expensive items is I need to bring data over, I need integration, I need configuration or customization for my specific needs. Those really need to be spelled out up front before you sign anything from that standpoint. The other thing I would tell you is if you're making a significant leap to a new ERP, think about phases. Instead of trying to say, let me get everything done I've seen in the ERP at one time, think about doing 2 or 3 phases. Make sure your phase 1 does bring new value to all of your employees, because what will happen is they'll see that you guys have added a whole bunch of new work for them, because now they're working in 2 systems, but you want to make sure they're getting something out of it when they're done with it, even at the end of phase 1. So think about what you want to get done in phase 1 that's going to keep driving your business and moving forward, and then start adding things you haven't done in the past into phase 2 and phase 3. Again, similar to optimization, the next step after that would be, let me actually run a set of sample, let me get it configured, you're going to train, you're going to reinforce, and then make sure you set up an agreement with your ERP vendor on a realignment, assessment and realignment. At a minimum, I would tell you at least every 2 years, ideally about on an annual basis. So with that, I'll open it up to questions and answers that you may have.
If you have a question, please fill it out on the chat function, which is the second button from the left at the top.
So one of the questions is I have an ERP and I don't know where the data is stored. Do you have to contact the ERP vendor, or can you help?
Yeah, so that actually happens often. So this day and age, we're seeing people move from one cloud solution to another, and they're asking, how do I get my data, or where is my data from that standpoint? Part of the conversation, again, that's a really good question. First thing is, if you do select a new one, make sure you define what happens to the data and how you get it back. But you generally have to call your current vendor and say, I would like to have access to my data. Now, they're going to ask you why. You could actually present it that you're setting up a data warehouse and you want to extract that data because you need it from a reporting standpoint. I've used that if we felt that there would be a potential risk standpoint on it. We don't want to potentially tell the current vendor what we're about to do. And so that would be an approach that you do it as we're building a data warehouse, we want to create more visibility, and we need access to our data.
Okay, this one that came in here, it says, as businesses move forward, hold on, let's just scroll up a little bit.
Do you want to
As
just
businesses move forward to more configurable models with configurator packages becoming more robust, how has that changed the role of an ERP?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as more and more configurable configurable products and modules have come out, again, it gives your customers visibility. It actually changes a lot in your sales process on how you're trying to put together what the end product's going to look like. But the other part would be is many of the ERPs currently have configurators that they've built or interface with their third-party solutions. Very similar to what I've said kind of all along this process, you're trying to remove a lot of manual process and workarounds. So if you create a configurator that from there you have to re-enter everything, you haven't really accomplished what you're looking for. You've accomplished the front end, maybe your client can see it, but you really want to look at it and say, how do I bring this together? Your configurator should probably connect with your engineering solutions, which should eventually connect to your ERP from a BOM standpoint, as well as all of your shop floor orders and purchasing standpoint.
Okay. Could you cover cloud-based versus in-house? I know we had it on the slide, but.
Yep. So, guys, that was actually an interesting question because I'm actually seeing almost all ERP vendors starting to say today that they're a cloud-based solution. First, I will tell you that it's actually a small percentage of ERPs that are truly cloud. A true cloud solution has something known as a single code base, where multiple customers are running off of one single platform. In majority of the ERP vendors, when they say that they're cloud hosted or cloud-based, you almost have to ask them, where is my system hosted? If they say to you that it's sitting in Azure, if they say to you it's sitting on Amazon and it's a server, you can ask them questions on how is my system going to be updated, how often is it going to be updated, how do you manage revision control, and what I'm finding it is 90% time, it's actually not that different than when it was on-premise. They're going to log into your system in the cloud, they're going to actually update it in the cloud, and it'll still match to that timing standpoint to say what's the outage look like and things like that. So that industry right now is going through this changeover to a true cloud solution, and a true cloud solution is a single code base. And majority of the ERP vendors don't have that. So my preference on it is really I'm somewhat neutral on it. I know that's not a great answer, but realistically I look at it and say if you've invested in a platform and you're comfortable with it and you've got good support, you can continue to run it from that standpoint. If you're looking at it saying, hey, I've got a big capital expenditure that I need to make in order for me to run this, then you kind of look at the cloud-hosted platform. I think if you guys remember, one of my comments to you guys was it's really important to get a 5-year total cost of ownership. That total cost of ownership should include all of the license costs, all the professional services, and I really create a bucket called platform. The platform is all the hardware, the licenses, the cloud side of it, the backup side of it, all of those things that goes around putting these systems together.
Awesome, thank you. Another question, how do I budget both hard and soft costs?
So if I can ask the person who asked that question, are you thinking about hard costs as costs that would be defined, your licensing, your consulting? I just want to understand what you envision as your soft costs. Are these your internal costs, efficiency costs? What are the costs that you consider that you're asking about? I'll go to the next question. If you get a chance to respond to that, I'll be able to answer that better.
Cost is internal.
Okay. All right. Thank you, viewer 13. Actually, that's a really good question. And depending on the size of the organization, one of the things that I always share with everyone is an ERP selection, especially a new selection journey, has a pretty huge impact on your organization. Remember that A-team that we put together, all those individuals will have their day job, will continue to run the business while they're working on this ERP. And you should be budgeting somewhere between 20 to 30% of their time on selecting an ERP during the time period of selection. So I've seen selections as little as 3 to 4 months from getting started to when they select something, and then again another 9 to 12 months afterwards in implementing it. That's just going to be additional time that everyone's spending. Other soft costs that will actually get added that you may not think about is you may actually have costs associated with your outside accounting firms. Maybe you need some help from them on the data that you need to put together, tax reporting, all of those things. You may end up buying some new tools that you hadn't planned on from a shipping standpoint, from the label makers, things like that, that also become part of it. I hope that helps.
Okay, this next one is about ERP support. What is your advice on the best way to engage current ERP providers to ensure that we are getting the maximum service and support from them?
Okay. So I'm going to respond to that from just a unique perspective. One of the things that I always question is, what is someone's incentive? If I'm an ERP vendor, I make my money in two major transactions, right? So my goal is I want as many people using my product as possible. So I'm going to put my best foot forward to give you the right amount of resources, tools to implement my solution. And then once it's implemented, my goal really is to make sure that you keep paying the annual support or usage fee. I think it's really important up front to understand their support and alignment model. What I've seen many of them do is, we have news groups, we have releases that we put together, we have videos that we release, and from there you should be able to figure out how to realign your company to the new features that we're adding. I think that you have to have an open conversation with them to say, our goal is we want you as an expert to guide us. We want to share with you where our business is, where it's going. How are you going to support me from that standpoint? And if the answer is, we don't really do that, I really think you have to question that partnership from a long-term standpoint. Now, the exception I will say is about 50% of the ERPs are made by the manufacturers and implemented and supported by the manufacturers. The other 50% are supported by third parties. If you have a third-party partner or a consulting firm that's actually helping you implement it, and they just don't have an alignment process, now may be the time to look at it and say, do I want to bring in another partner?
One of the biggest mistakes small manufacturers might make when choosing and implementing an ERP?
A new ERP. Time and documentation. I would tell you that almost across the board, if you go back to the old verbiage, you have a salesperson show up, they show you their new product, you get caught up with all the new features and functionality, the whiz-bang stuff. You forget to do the back end, the more important part. What's my core business, that 80-20%? These are the 80% of things I really need to take care of. How do I make sure the current solution has it? And then how do I implement it? The second part I would tell you is change management is extremely difficult. We all say that we adapt to change well, but even if you reflect yourself, if something's been working a long time, it's hard to make that change. So talking about it, saying what does that change look like? How do I implement it? Those are going to be really important things. So once you've selected it, it's really important how do you actually use it and how is everyone in your organization using it, or else you'll never get to what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, your contact information is up on the screen right now. If anybody has further questions, please feel free to reach out to Sarit or Raj. We're happy to help.
And I'd just like to thank Raj and Sarit for a terrific presentation as well. And if you'd like a copy of the presentation, you can email me at info@wmep.org. I'll put that on the chat screen. But I thought it was a very insightful session today, and greatly appreciate SSR's presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.